The door slammed open so violently that the brass handle struck the wall with a sharp crack. Diane Abbott stood in the doorway, chest heaving, eyes blazing with a mix of relief and fury that had been building for days. For nearly 48 hours, she had believed her husband might be dead. Victor Newman had kidnapped Jack Abbott, holding him hostage aboard a yacht somewhere off the coast. It had been a calculated move in Victor's endless war for power. Jack was leverage, nothing more. But to Diane, Jack was everything. She had mobilized everyone she could. Billy Abbott, Kyle Abbott, lawyers, investigators, private security teams. The search had consumed her entirely. She hadn't slept, she hadn't eaten. Her mind had been running on raw fear and adrenaline. And now she had found him. But what she saw inside that room froze her heart. Jack Abbott lay on the bed, half-dressed, and beside him was Patty Williams. For a moment, the world stopped moving. Billy and Kyle rushed past Diane into the room behind her, but their footsteps sounded distant, almost unreal. Diane couldn't look away from the bed. Jack looked disoriented. His shirt hung open, buttons undone. His hair was messy, and his eyes were unfocused. Patty, meanwhile, looked disturbingly pleased. She sat beside him with a dreamy smile, as if they had just shared some beautiful romantic moment. Billy's face twisted in disgust. "Jack, what the hell is this?" Kyle stared in shock, his expression shifting from confusion to anger in seconds. "Dad?" Jack blinked slowly, trying to focus on the people suddenly crowding the room. "Diane." But Diane didn't answer, because something inside her had snapped. Her hand moved before she even realized it. The slap echoed through the room. Jack's head jerked to the side as Diane's palm struck his face with full force. The sound seemed to cut through the air like a gunshot. Silence followed. Jack blinked again, stunned. Diane stood over him, breathing hard, tears of rage shining in her eyes. "I searched everywhere for you," she said, her voice shaking. "I thought you were dying. I thought Victor had you locked away somewhere suffering." Her voice rose. "And this is what I find." Patty tilted her head slightly, still smiling. "Oh, Diane, don't be so dramatic. Jack and I simply reconnected." Billy stepped forward instantly. "Shut up, Patty." Kyle's fists clenched. "You're sick." Jack tried to sit up, rubbing his head. "Wait, something's not right, But Diane wasn't listening. Her heart was pounding too loudly. She had imagined every possible nightmare scenario during Jack's disappearance. But this humiliation, this betrayal, it burned deeper than any fear. "You cheated on me," she said quietly. Jack shook his head weakly. "No, Diane, I didn't." "You're lying." Her voice exploded with fury. "You were in bed with her." Jack looked around the room, confusion flooding his face. "What happened?" Patty leaned closer to him. "You don't remember, that's all right, sweetheart, it was magical." Billy turned sharply toward her. "You drugged him, didn't you?" Patty simply smiled. "Oh, Billy, always so suspicious." Kyle looked ready to explode. "Dad would never do this willingly." Jack pressed his hand to his temple. Something was wrong. His memory felt fragmented, like pieces missing from a puzzle. He remembered Patty bringing him a drink. He remembered feeling dizzy. And after that, nothing. "Diane, I think she drugged me," Jack said weakly. But Diane stared at him coldly. "You expect me to believe that?" Her voice was ice. "You expect me to believe you just accidentally ended up in bed with your insane ex-girlfriend?" Jack opened his mouth to explain, but the words wouldn't come. The room was spinning. Patty suddenly laughed softly. "Oh, Jack, don't ruin the moment with excuses." Billy pointed toward the door. "That's enough, security is coming." Kyle stepped beside his father protectively. "You're not getting away with this." Patty simply stood. She smoothed her dress, looking entirely unbothered. "You boys are so dramatic." She glanced at Diane. "But you should really be thanking me." Diane stared at her. "For what?" Patty smiled sweetly. "For reminding you who your husband really is." The tension in the room thickened like smoke. And for a moment, Diane thought she might actually lose control. Because Patty wasn't just mocking her. She was enjoying it. Billy gestured toward the hallway. "Get her out of here." Two security guards appeared at the door. Patty didn't resist as they escorted her away. But as she passed Diane, she leaned closer and whispered softly, "He kissed me first." Diane's entire body stiffened. The door closed behind Patty. The room fell silent again. Jack slowly stood from the bed, still unsteady. "Diane, listen to me." But Diane stepped backward. Her eyes were dark with rage. "You disgust me." Kyle looked between them anxiously. "Mom, wait." But Diane was already turning toward the door. Billy called after her. "Diane, Jack was drugged. We need to figure out what happened." She paused for a second. Then she looked back at Jack, and the hatred in her eyes shocked everyone in the room. "Figure it out," she said coldly. "But don't expect forgiveness." Then she walked away. Jack collapsed back onto the bed. His head spun. Something terrible had happened. And somehow, everything he loved had just been destroyed. But the real storm was only beginning. Because Diane Abbott had just remembered something about herself. Something she had tried to bury for years. The dark side that had once made her one of the most dangerous schemers in Genoa City. And now that side was waking up again. Slowly, angrily. And this time, no one in the Abbott family would be safe. Diane Abbott sat alone in the dark living room of the Abbott mansion. The lights were off. The house was silent. But inside her mind, chaos raged. Hours had passed since the yacht incident. Billy and Kyle had returned home earlier, trying to talk to her. Trying to calm her down. But Diane had refused. She didn't want comfort. She wanted answers. And more than anything, she wanted revenge. Her fingers tightened around the glass of whiskey she had barely touched. She had warned Kyle days ago. If anything happened to Jack, if someone hurt him, she would destroy whoever was responsible. At the time, she had been thinking about Victor Newman's. Now things were more complicated. Because Jack himself had become part of the problem. Diane stood and walked slowly toward the large window overlooking the gardens. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass. Cold, calculating. The old Diane. She had spent years trying to prove she was different now. Better, reformed. But tonight, all those carefully built walls had collapsed. Jack had humiliated her. And worse, he had done it with Patty Williams. Of all people, the woman who had once shot him. The woman obsessed with him. The woman everyone knew was dangerously unstable. Diane's jaw tightened. Unacceptable. Her phone buzzed. She glanced down. Kyle, she let it ring. Then it stopped. Moments later, another message appeared. "KYLE, Mom, Dad was drugged, we're getting proof." Diane stared at the screen. Drugged? Maybe. But right now, she didn't care. Because the damage had already been done. Her reputation, her marriage, her pride, all shattered in a single moment. And someone would pay for that. Footsteps echoed from the hallway. Billy entered the room cautiously. "You should really turn on a light," he said quietly. Diane didn't respond. Billy sighed. "Look, I know you're angry, anyone would be." "Angry," Diane repeated slowly. "That's what you call this." Billy rubbed the back of his neck. "Jack was drugged, we're almost certain." She turned toward him. Her expression was terrifyingly calm. "And whose fault is that?" Billy frowned. "Patty's, obviously." "No." Diane shook her head. "Victor." Billy hesitated. She stepped closer. "Victor kidnapped Jack. Victor put him on that yacht. Victor allowed Patty to be there." Her eyes hardened. This entire nightmare started because of Victor Newman. Billy couldn't argue with that. Victor had manipulated the entire situation. "But still, that doesn't mean Jack betrayed you," Billy said. Diane looked at him with icy disbelief. "I saw him in that bed. He wasn't himself." She crossed her arms. "Does that change what happened?" Billy opened his mouth, then closed it again. "Because honestly, no, it didn't." Diane walked past him toward the staircase. "Where are you going?" Billy asked. "To work." Billy blinked. "At this hour?" She looked back at him. Jack Abbott may be the face of Jabot. Her voice turned cold. But I'm still an executive there. Billy's eyes widened slightly. What are you planning? Diane smiled faintly. Damage control. She walked upstairs. Billy stood in the dark living room uneasy. Because he had seen that look before. Years ago, when Diane had been at her most ruthless. And he knew exactly what it meant. Someone was about to get destroyed. Across town, Jack Abbott sat alone in his office at Jabot. His head still throbbed from whatever Patty had given him. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional wreckage. Diane wouldn't answer his calls. Kyle was trying to help, but things were complicated. And the media had already started whispering about the yacht scandal. Jack leaned back in his chair, exhausted. Then the office door opened. He looked up. Diane stood there. Elegant, calm, terrifying. Diane, he said hopefully. You came. She closed the door slowly. Oh, yes. Jack stood. Thank God, listen, I know what it looked like, but I'm not here to discuss our marriage. His heart sank. I'm here on business. She walked to the desk and placed a folder in front of him. Jack frowned. What's this? Board documents. He opened it, and his face went pale. Diane, what did you do? She met his eyes without emotion. I called an emergency board meeting. Jack flipped through the pages. Votes, signatures, legal motions. You're suspending me from Jabot, he whispered. Temporarily, Diane said. Until the scandal dies down. Jack stared at her. You're destroying me. No, Diane replied coldly. You did that yourself. The silence between them felt suffocating. Jack finally whispered, Diane, I love you. Her expression didn't change. Then you shouldn't have betrayed me. He stepped closer. I didn't. She paused, just for a moment, because deep down, somewhere beneath the anger, she wanted to believe him. But the image of him in that bed refused to leave her mind. She turned away. This conversation is over. Jack reached for her arm. Diane, please. She pulled away instantly. Don't touch me. Her voice was sharp as glass. Right now, you're lucky I stopped at your company. Jack felt a chill run through him. What does that mean? Diane walked toward the door. But before leaving, she looked back one final time. You should start wondering who else I might decide to punish. Then she left. Jack sank slowly into his chair. Because he suddenly realized something terrifying. Diane Abbott had declared war. And in Genoa City. That never ended well for anyone. Somewhere else in the city, Victor Newman sat in his office at Newman Enterprises. He had already heard about the yacht incident and the chaos it had created. Victor smiled slightly, because while the Abbotts were tearing themselves apart, his empire was quietly rising again. But what Victor didn't know yet was that Diane Abbott had just added his name to her list. And when Diane went to war, even Victor Newman might regret starting the battle. The truth about Jack being drugged would eventually surface. But by then, the damage Diane unleashed might already be impossible to undo.